Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this lovely Thursday morning. Lovely to see you. Thank you, as always, ever so much for joining us for our Bible talk for today as we continue our adventure through the Psalms. And today is Psalm 137, thought by most people as one of the most difficult and controversial passages in the entire Bible. So, you'll see why in a moment. So without further ado, I shall read you Psalm 137. I'll listen to it first, I'll try and explain it to you afterwards. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our harps. For there our captors asked for us songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they said, tear it down to its foundations. O daughter Babylon, you devastator, happy shall they be who pay you back what you've done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Right, there are two things that are best known about this psalm. Firstly is the first verse, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and where we wept, and so on. Best known because of a song by Boney M about 40 years ago or something, which they sung the most completely inappropriate tune, or this boppy tune to this very, very difficult song. And so one thing people remember most about Psalm 137 is by the rivers of Babylon. I shan't sing it to you. And the other one, of course, is that horrible last verse. But let me see if I can explain to you what's really going on in this psalm. The psalm is actually in three sections, and it's not quite the way it is on the paragraphs. If you look at the paragraphs, if you look at your Bibles, you'll probably see it 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 9. It's not actually right. It should really be 1 to 4, 5 to 6, and 7 to 9. Verses 1 to 4 are really about the sort of the situation that the people are in. Verses 5 and 6 are about remembering, and 7 to 9 are obviously that kind of prayer at the end as well. So 1 to 4 are really about us, about what we do. About 5 and 6 are about what I do. And about 7 to 9 are really about kind of that prayer at the end. So despite what it looks like in the paragraphs, it should really be 1 to 4, 5 to 6, and 7 to 9, if you want to think it through carefully. So let's take these sections one at a time. Firstly, verses 1 to 4. It outlines here the situation that the people are in, and they are in exile. In the 6th century BC, they were taken away in caravans, and not caravans like we have these days. They were taken away Jerusalem was smashed. This place was razed to the ground, and most of the people were taken away to places like Babylon. And Babylon is what we in nowadays what you might call Iraq, that kind of area. And they were taken by the Babylonians. They were taken away, and that's the situation that they're in. And whilst they're away, they're obviously away from home. You've got to remember that they've been taken away from this, so they're homeless. They're taken away from their homes. They've been taken away from their land. And they've also been their temple's been smashed as well. So you can imagine how they must have felt about that. They must have felt left by their homes. They've lost their livelihoods, and they must have thought their worship and their religion had gone as well. So that's the situation that they're in. And when they were out there, they hung their harps on willow trees. So they just didn't feel like singing anymore. And that's the situation that they're in. And whilst they're away, of course, the tormentors, it says, ask them for mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. So not only are they away, they've lost everything, they've lost their homes, their livelihoods, they've lost their temple, but now the tormentors are kind of rubbing it in as well. And I believe there's an ancient Babylonian picture of it actually happening. People out it, and they were made to work in fields with quite an intricate system of irrigation they had in Babylon, and they were made to work against their will. So that's the situation they're in. And I suppose what I want to say, as always with the Bible, don't just read it, but feel it as well. try and really just try and feel the situation and feel where these people are coming from, and really try to get your head into hearts into their hearts, if you like, and see if you can feel what's going on there. So that's the situation that they're in. Then in verse 5 and 6, he's having outlined the situation and it's being rubbed in and so on and so on and so on. Then talks about remembering, and he says, if I forget you, let my right hand wither, and let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I forget you. So he says, so the guy is saying here is, whatever anybody else may be feeling, despite the fact that I'm away from home, despite the fact things are really bad, I'm not going to forget. I'm going to carry on, and I'm not going to forget you, O Jerusalem. So, and I think there's something remarkable here about faith, actually, about this person who's praying this, and he's saying that, I'm in a foreign land, all this stuff is going on, we're in an awful situation, we feel we've lost absolutely everything, and yet he says, I am not going to forget you, O Jerusalem. I still believe. And I think there's something remarkable in that for us actually today. I think we can feel, not to not this extent, of course, but it's easy to feel sometimes very much on our own. The Christian faith doesn't all come across as particularly popular or fashionable these days. And however much other people maybe seem to be drifting away or whatever, I can feel like that sometimes if you listen to the press anyway. He's saying here, Ina, if I forget you, let my tongue cling to my mouth and I am not going to forget. Other people may forget, they can think what they're like, but I am not going to forget. So you've got the situation in verses 1 to 4, this awful situation with people rubbing it in and so on. In verses 5 and 6, he's saying that despite all this, I am not going to forget. Then in verses 7 to 9, you get this prayer at the end. And it's obviously difficult. It's praying against the Edomites, who are obviously responsible for Jerusalem's fall. It's praying against Babylon, who've taken the people away against their will. And there've been two dangers with this last three verses. One is that amongst some people use it as a prayer for revenge, and that's clearly not very Christian, and that's not the way we should be thinking. But the other danger, which I think is actually equally dangerous, is to miss it out. And if you go to the old Book of Common Prayer, the old Alternative Service book, for example, there was a trend about 40, 50 years ago. You to put these words in brackets and saying you could miss them out, and we shouldn't be saying such things. But actually, I think that completely misunderstands. And I think it's important that we leave them in and that we actually hear what these verses say. And let me give you 3 reasons why. Okay, why I think it's really important that we keep these verses in. Firstly, it describes the situation, what it must feel like to be an exile. Not many of us who are watching this morning talk this morning have ever been taken away against our will. We've not been uprooted and taken to a land we don't want to go to, and so on and so on and so on. But that's what it must feel like. And I think it's an honest description of what it feels like, actually, to be taken into exile or something. And the thing about smashing children against a stone, which is obviously absolutely awful, apparently that's what captors used to do in those days. And that was also a sign of victory, is that they used to bash children against the wall. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And that's what victors used to do. And there's no reason to believe that the Edomites and the Babylonians hadn't done that to Jerusalem too. So in a sense, I think what he's saying here, he's really saying is, one day we're going to win through and it'll happen to you. So it's in a sense a bit like, it's like a more horrible version of, putting a foreign flag up on Downing Street and say, well, one day we'll do that to your land. It's a bit like saying that you're winning now, we're losing, but one day we'll win and you'll lose. I think that's what it's really about saying here. So the first reason we should keep it in, because it's an honest description of what it feels like to be an exile. As I say, not something you and I have often experienced, but actually that's what it felt like for them at the time. Secondly, if we're honest, one of the great things about the Psalms is that they're full of honesty about the way things really feel. Perhaps not to this extent, but if we're honest with ourselves, have we not all felt vengeful at times? If we're honest with ourselves, when we hear awful things going on, we watched about that dam being smashed in the Kherson area of Ukraine at the moment. We can feel venge sometimes. And I think if we're right, it's right to acknowledge that within ourselves, even amongst us wonderful godly people, we all feel vengeful from time to time. And I think it's right not to push it under the carpet, not to do anything about it, but actually to acknowledge the fact that it's there. So it's honest. It's an honest description of what the heart feels like sometimes. And thirdly, it's actually a prayer. And in a sense, what he's actually doing here is he's taking his vengeful thoughts and he's bringing them to God. What he's not saying here is, rise up, boys. Let's get our weapons of war together and fight back, and let's do horrible things. He's actually bringing it to God. It's actually a prayer to God. And I think one of the great things about God is that we can have a prayer of faith, and however difficult situation, however good or bad or ugly our feelings may be, we can bring them before God. And what he's actually doing here is he's being absolutely honest in God's presence, and he's actually bringing his feelings to God, and then it says letting God deal with it. And I think there's a prayer of faith in here. So it doesn't reads horribly to us, but actually it's actually bringing his feelings before God and letting God deal with them. So 3 reasons why we shouldn't miss this off. Firstly, because it's an honest description of what exile felt like. Secondly, because it's honest, and don't we all feel these kind of feelings from time to time. And thirdly, because it's actually a prayer of faith, that he's bringing his situation before God and then says letting God deal with it. So it's a tricky psalm, this one. It really is, and it's a knotty. But what we need to do is remember firstly the verses 1 to 4 are the situation they're in. They're taken into exile, and they're really hurting. 5 to 6 are about saying, as we can all say, that other people may forget, but we're never going to forget that God is good and Jerusalem, basically. And then verses 7 to 9. These very, very difficult verses, but remembering that it's actually an honest description of what exile feels like, and that's what people did in those days. And it's an honest description of what historical description. Also, because if we're honest, we all feel vengeful from time to time, and it's right to acknowledge that feeling, and actually, rather than brushing it under the carpet, to recognise that it's in the heart of all of us. But also, to however difficult things may be, that we can bring our feelings before God and let God deal with them. Psalm 137. I hope you found that helpful. God bless you. Thank you so much for watching. Do please share this message with your friends.